Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever the fuck you're tuning in. This is our NBA Finals wrap up, kind of beginning of the offseason because we had some interesting news break today. Episode of Backyard Buckets brought to you by Backyard Sports. We have two and a half of the crew here today. Ryan's going to cut his video. We're having some technical difficulties, but Ryan, how are you doing behind the black screen, buddy?
I'm great as long as y'all can hear me.
We can hear you. We just can't see you. Bentley, how are you doing, man?
I'm excited to be here. I feel like I haven't been on the show with the three of us in a while. Our schedules are all over the place, as is typical of summertime. But I'm excited to be here, talk about the boys once again.
Yeah, buddy. Good to have everybody here. So we'll jump right into it. So the Celtics win the NBA Finals 4-1, and it really felt like it could have been a sweep. If they'd have been playing at home in Game 4, they probably would have checked in and finished up. Maybe it felt like they kind of checked out of Game 4, knowing that they were headed back home for Game 5, and of course they wrap it up in Boston. Title number 18. Magic Johnson had some words to say. You know, he's disappointed that the Celtics now officially have more titles than the Lakers. And of course, we continue with the stat that the Lakers and Celtics combined have won like 95% of NBA titles. It's a ridiculous number. They both, combined for 35 titles. It's crazy. I want to go to you first, though, Bentley, and kind of get your thoughts on this series. You know, we talked a lot about kind of Boston had an interesting road to the finals, and then of course, they wrap it up 4-1, and I don't know how many people really expected Dallas to be in the NBA Finals. So curious to get your thoughts on this series and kind of how it went, and what are your takeaways?
I have so many thoughts. First, this is not going to be a very pro Boston podcast on my part here, so I'll just get it out of the way early. They were the most complete team from start to finish this entire NBA season, right from October forward. 1 through 6, maybe 7. They probably had the deepest roster, and aside from Porzingis, they really had the best injury luck of basically every team going forward. So credit to them.
Season, they had a lot of luck with Porzingis and his injuries too.
Yeah, they did. They got 50-something games out of him, which is more than most teams have gotten throughout his entire career, honestly.
Yeah.
Prior or post knee injury in New York.
That's like a 2-season number for him over the last few years.
Yeah, right. So credit to Boston for closing it out in 5. No matter what level of the playoffs you're playing at, closing out a series in 5 is an impressive thing to do. I thought that Joe Mazzulla has kind of proven himself worthy to be the head coach there. A lot of people were a little curious as to how or why he got that job after Udoka was fired. I think he has improved a lot, very significant improvement on his part from the time that he took over to now, obviously. That being said, enough of the glazing out of the way. The fucking Dallas Mavericks, my God. What a pitiful performance from basically everyone not named Derek Lively on defense and Luka. Like, Kyrie Irving coming into the series, people were hyping him up so much. There was discourse whether it was the best scoring backcourt of all time, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. The Splash Brothers literally still exist. Not saying that they're better at this exact moment, but they won 4 titles together. How do you what? That's an insane thing to say, right? I will say, however, Dallas, despite the horrific performance, I think if they were to come out and play 7 A+ games, they probably don't win the series. They just didn't have the horses, right? It's a terrible matchup for them. Boston has 4, maybe 5 guys they can put on the court all at once to guard, quote unquote, guard Luka. Derek Jones Jr. playing significant minutes in an NBA Finals game, not something you're really excited about. Tim Hardaway really only played well whenever Luke was off the court, and Luke is going to be on the court for 40-plus minutes a night. They just did not have the talent to compete with a Boston who, like I said, was probably the deepest and most healthy team in the entire NBA this whole regular season. Now, we could get into this in a later subject because I want to let Ryan say his part about the series. But there are many, many reasons why Boston was very deep and as talented as they are. But I'll hold on to that for later.
Yeah, hold that thought. Yeah, and last week when I was on with Ryan here, I took a little bit of a victory lap with the Joe Mazzulla thing. I agree with you 100%. He has improved drastically. I felt like he was a bit of a detriment last year in the finals. He got outcoached by Malone quite a bit. On top of the fact that Denver was, pretty fantastic last year, right? So I don't want to take anything away from what Denver did, but I thought Joe Mazzulla was much, much better this year, especially in the way that he just didn't get in the way in a lot of ways, but also in-game situations. I felt like he managed and handled that a lot better this year. And that comes with experience, right? And you get a guy who didn't have an offseason. He got thrown in there when the Ime Udoka stuff broke, et cetera. But I thought he improved a lot. And like you mentioned, I think Boston just had so many more horses than Dallas. Ryan, I want to get your thoughts here on the series and what are your takeaways from this series as well?
It wasn't the most riveting series in the world. I think that's like a big part of it.
Nice.
But I think Boston was arguably the best team all season, even though the East was pretty weak and the West beat itself up. They were arguably the best team. They were a really tough playoff matchup because they could shorten their rotation and really play like six, guys who have either been all-stars or might be all-stars in the future. But I think almost everybody in their six-man rotation at one point was an all-star or an all-NBA guy, to include Al Horford, those types of guys. Yeah, wasn't super interesting. I think it was kind of how we expected it to go. I'm glad to see Tatum and Brown get their championship after a lot of years of should we trade Jaylen Brown? Should we split them up? They have a redundant play style. I never really agreed with that. I don't think they have that much of a redundant play style. But Tatum took a leap this year to make it even less redundant, which I think was good. He became a better playmaker. His pull-up game is improved because he was not great at that before. So I really think it's a culmination of good team building and guys hitting their potential, which is, not every team can do that, but I think they did it better than anybody over the last couple of years, and they finally hit the mountaintop.
For sure. So on that note, you mentioned, Ryan, the Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, the debate. Should you split them up? Are they redundant? That sort of thing. I'm going to go to you first. I want to get your thoughts on Jason Tatum led the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals in all three of the major categories, right? Points, rebounds, and assists. He led the team in all three of them. And to be honest, like rebounds and assists, a couple rebounds more and a couple assists more is a much bigger margin than maybe a couple of points more. So he was kind of demonstrably the best player in this series. But Jaylen Brown won the MVP, right? And I know there's a lot of conversation about the things that Jaylen Brown did defensively, especially, what he did in terms of kind of initiating the offense oftentimes. But, Jason Tatum did lead his team in all three categories, and Jaylen Brown wins the MVP. So, Ryan, I want to get your thoughts. How do you feel about Jaylen Brown winning the MVP in the NBA Finals over his teammate who, on paper at least, it looked like had a better series?
Yeah, it's a good question. I thought Brown was the MVP going into the final game. I thought it was very close. I probably, if I was making the decision, would try to co-MVP them. I think that is a equitable decision because I think Tatum deserved it as much as Brown did. It's hard to not give it to one of them and give it to the other guy. And maybe I'm kind of half-assing the answer there, but I do honestly believe that's the case. I think they do different things and they both did it equally well. I'm a lot happier about this than say Andre Iguodala's Finals MVP, which I thought was a travesty. I think, if they gave it to either one, I'd be fine. I think both of them have kind of figured it out as teammates that it's not going to affect them too much, which I think is kind of like the narrative right now. But yeah, I think there's an argument that Tatum should have got it statistically. There's an argument that Brown was a better defender and probably a more consistent player. I think is one of the arguments I would make. I thought he was he was there all the time, and that has to count for something. So, yeah, I would co-MVP him, I guess is really my answer.
Yeah, hasn't that been the conversation about Jason Tatum quite a bit since he's been in the NBA? Like, his good is as good as anybody else's good, but he does disappear. And you mentioned the consistency piece, which probably, maybe for the voters, it was kind of a difference maker. And you look at the defensive side of the ball, Jaylen Brown is a difference maker on a team on the defensive side of the ball. Bentley, what are your thoughts on this MVP debate?
Yeah, I thought they got it right. Obviously, it's a very close decision. I don't think that co-MVPs would have been like an incorrect thing to do. But I do think that Jaylen Brown was a more impactful player in the series. Watching the 5 games throughout, there were often times when Dallas was on offense where they would search for Jason Tatum to be the primary defender, right? For Luka, they would switch into that. They did not do that as much or any that I can remember off the top of my head for Jaylen Brown, right? Whether it was Brown, White, or Drew, they would often run the pick and roll action to get that defender off of Luka or Kyrie. But when there was Tatum, they felt comfortable going directly at him. I just feel like that has a more impactful difference on the game than does, maybe the 11 assists that Tatum had. Was game 5, right? The 11 assist game, but they're like 28 and 11, something like that. I don't have the box score right in front of me. I apologize.
Yeah, I think it was 1 rebound shy of triple-double.
Yeah, so obviously he was doing incredible things. They both played very well. I just feel like Jaylen Brown had more moments, if you can call it that. I mean, these were like blowout games for the most part. But like in game 3, they almost blew that 20-point lead, and Jaylen hits like the kind of pull-up, just nothing, buries it, nothing but net, almost the dagger, right, to really stop the run that Jason Kidd randomly called a timeout during.
Jason Kidd helped him stop that run, but
yeah,
you still have to make the shot, right?
Yeah. I just feel like that Jaylen Brown maybe had a more impactful series. And all you can do is play the team that's in front of you, right? So maybe that was matchup dependent. Maybe if they're playing somebody else, then Jason Tatum goes off more and it has a more impactful series. I can't tell you one way or the other, but I feel like in this specific series, Jaylen Brown probably was the more impactful player, the more valuable player on both ends of the court, even though he had a really mediocre closeout game on the offensive side of the ball. But, you got to play on both ends of the court, and I just felt that Jaylen Brown had the larger impact in totality on the series, despite what the box scores would say.
Yeah, and we all know how Jason Kidd, the aforementioned Jason Kidd, feels about Jaylen Brown and his spot, his status on this team. So he was very vocal about. I believe it was after game 1 even of this series that he and it felt like it might have been a little bit of kind of cheeky gamesmanship, trying to maybe drive a wedge between Brown and Tatum, and it didn't work.
Not quite.
Yeah. All right. Well, as good sports shows do, we're going to turn the page from the championship to immediately talking about the offseason. And we're going to start with the losers of the NBA Finals here. And Bentley, I'm going to go your way first. So Dallas Mavericks get to the NBA Finals. Again, as I mentioned before, I don't know how many people at the start of the Western Conference playoffs would have picked them to win the Western Conference. I know you had them going to the Western Conference Finals as your kind of ceiling for them and kind of what you thought as a dark horse participant in the conference finals. So hats off to you for that. They went one step further than you gave them credit for. Felt like matchups kind of played a little bit into that. Denver, I think, would have been a tougher matchup for them than maybe Minnesota turned out to be. But let's consider them as they are, NBA Finals participants. They lost. So what do they need to do to get over the hump and win an NBA Finals, considering their current roster and maybe any moves that they can make?
Sure. Well, my answer a few hours ago would have been different in light of the JJ Redick news coming out today. I don't think that they're going to be signing LeBron James in free agency. That would have certainly increased their odds of winning an NBA title. So really, the best answer I can give is that they need another creator. It doesn't have to be a playmaker in the sense that Luka is a playmaker and Jokic is a playmaker and Tatum was a playmaker in this series, right? They need someone that can create their own shots for themselves, right? When Luka is not on the court, when Luka is on the court, when Kyrie is on the court, like there was nobody to create pressure that would force Boston to double the ball handler because they were scared of somebody else getting the ball, right? The driving kicks that we talk about all the time with the best players in the NBA, you drive, you kick, somebody else makes a shot. They don't have anybody to make that shot, right? Josh Green hit a couple threes. Derek Jones Jr. is okay. He's not a lights out 3-point shooter. Jaden Hardy is not that guy because he's not like a spot up guy. They need someone who is able to receive the pass on the kick out and make the shot while simultaneously being a threat to either swing the rock or drive like a secondary driver after the initial driving kick, right? That's something that is invaluable in the NBA, is being able to be a threat from the interior and the exterior. And they just don't have that guy, right, to run alongside Luka and Kyrie. Now, I understand that kind of the era of the big three is over. We kind of moved past that. It's more of like a 1-2 man show and then everybody else around it. Well, if that's what they're going to do, they have to find that third option, right? Every great team has a third option because that's just how basketball works. They don't like, who is the third best player on this team? Is it Daniel Gafford? Is it Derek Lively? Is it Josh Green? There's no really like clear cut third guy. And as great and as magical as Luka Doncic is, we just saw that he can't beat a 5-man roster by himself, right? Now, again, Boston was extremely deep, but they're going to be extremely deep again next year, right? Like, that's how it works. You have to have a guy who is able to force a double like Luka, and then you have to have guys that are playing off of him who also demand attention and can either make their shot or skip the ball or be a secondary driver, right? So they need to if I were them, I would be going after like a Paul George. Like, why not? A Klay Thompson is somebody who, even in the later stages of his career, forces the defender to stay with him when he stands out on the 3-point line. And when healthy, he's able enough to get into the lane and kind of kick the ball around and do whatever he needs to do, right? There are options out there on the free agency market, and we'll get into that in the next coming weeks, right, as free agency really opens up. But they have to have a third option that can take attention away from Luka and Kyrie whenever they do inevitably draw those doubles and still require a defender to stick with them on the perimeter.
Yeah. How do they pull Derek White away from the Celtics? Ryan, your way. What are your thoughts here? What does Dallas have to do to get over the hump?
They're in a tough spot. I think they have a lot of money with one of the guys that I think actually solves their problems, and Hardaway Jr.
Yeah, he can't be on a milk carton.
He was their third leading scorer this year and didn't do anything in the playoffs. I know he had an injury, but I mean, that just kills you. What did he score? 16 points per game, something like that this season? Like, that's a huge, to go to zero is that's a huge loss.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
I think, like, if you get that, you probably feel a lot better, especially with his ability to spread the floor and create a little bit, because of his shooting threat. I think he creates a little bit. I think they're in a tough spot financially. They don't really have a lot they can do. They got to kind of build with what they have. Is like a guy like Max Prosper going to be a contributor, like on the wing? Does Derek Lively develop a 3-point shot so now you can play like a different offense with him, which I think he might be able to. I think that's what you have to do. It's unfortunate, but just so many of those teams that are cap locked and don't have a lot of ability to move. Because who are they trading, right? Tim Hardaway? Because that's like their middling contract is Hardaway. So if they want to get like a guy in that range, someone has to take Hardaway, who just scored 0 points in the playoffs. I don't think it was 0, but it was very close to. I think it was like 4 points.
It was closer to 0 than his season average.
Yeah. So like, you're gonna have to give up picks probably to like get somebody. I'm not saying they can't, but it's tough, right? Because if that guy's available, everyone wants him. A guy in like the $20 million range that can like dribble, pass, shoot, like Bentley says, and create a little bit. That guy becomes available. Everybody offers everything, right? So it's just, they're in a tough spot. They just got to get, I think, some natural development. I like the team. I just think it's got to be internal development and maybe draft a guy who can contribute. I mean, that's really your options, right?
Yeah, the point you make about Lively is interesting because, we talked a little last week, but I know like the talking heads on cable networks made a big deal out of the fact that all the way through the Western Conference playoffs, Dallas was like Lob City, right? The Lob City Clippers. And then Boston just kept kind of sagging to the paint. I think if a guy like Lively can develop at least a mid-range shot, right? Because he doesn't even threaten you really in the mid-range. He threatens you at the rim on both ends of the floor. Super athletic on defense, so he can guard multiple positions and play the pick and roll and be able to guard externally. But he can't threaten you on the offense outside of the paint. So they really were just like sagging, playing, kind of blitzing at Luka. Kyrie was kind of on a milk carton for most of this series, especially in Boston. So if Lively's able to kind of stretch the floor a little bit, I think you get the lob kind of back into it as well, because then you've got, penetration, and you don't have 3-4 guys in the paint, and then Lively can kind of backdoor cut or, play off the pick and roll, that sort of thing. So that's a good point with Lively. If they can potentially, right? I never really thought of Lively as a guy that took a lot of jump shots even in college, right? In a game in college that, usually would be kind of copacetic for that. Maybe he's going to have to work hard at it this offseason because, as you mentioned, Ryan, they're a little bit strapped, and the new cap structure changes things for everybody. You can't just go out and trade. You can't just go out and do these things where you can just kind of throw money at the luxury tax in the past. Now these tiers, the aprons that they have do prevent a lot of that stuff. So it's not as simple as just, Tim Hardaway Jr., can we trade him for a few assets? So it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of develop internally somebody that can threaten and maybe open the floor a little bit.
I wanted to add, you said Lively didn't shoot much in college. He did shoot in high school. Obviously, that's high school. But I've told Bentley many times one of my criticisms of that Duke team is they made Lively a little bit of a one-trick pony when I think he's got some other skills. Of course, I said that about Mark Williams as well. I guess I just say that about every Duke big. I never said Mark Williams had a three-point shot, but he's got more than what they show, I think, a lot of the time. So yeah, I think it's feasible. The form looks good. Like if you watch him shoot, like for a big, it looks good. It's not like a perfect form, but for a guy his size, it looks pretty good. And he's got the athleticism and touch and those types of things that I think will make it successful. But who knows if that's this year or 5 years down the road? That's the tough part.
Just shoot 28 to 32%, right? Just be a threat, and you don't have to be a 38 to 45% shooter. Just shoot 28, 30%. Be a threat. Kind of stretch the floor. Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad that Ryan stood on the table for himself there, because I was absolutely going to call him out if he didn't say anything for admitting to me and telling me so many times that Derek Lively had guard skills that he was just not being able to showcase at Duke. Rookie head coach, first year head coach, whatever you say, whatever, not a big deal. He's progressed. He's gotten better. But I do think that Derek Lively is going to be a big part of their roster, game plan, whatever. Yeah, player development going forward. Obviously, he was just a rookie this year, and he played extremely, extremely well in the defensive end, and he's already mastered the art of the lob. He's so much better at it already than Rudy Gobert, and it's kind of crazy because Gobert's been in the league for a while, but his hands, you just don't ever see him like fumble the catch, right? Like he's lethal around the rim. And like you said, Gary, if he can just be like a 30% 3-point shooter and just be a threat, somebody that has to at least garner a little bit of attention out there, I think that could really open up another aspect of their offense.
Yeah, you don't even have to shoot 150 of them. Just be a threat out there.
Yeah, shoot like 2 a game. Call it good.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's shift gears to the winners of the NBA Finals, the winners of the NBA Championship here. Boston, we've seen them make runs to the Eastern Conference Finals. We saw them in the NBA Finals last year. We saw this kind of start under Brad Stevens and then evolve as Brad Stevens moved into the front office. Bentley, you mentioned it earlier how deep the roster was, and Ryan kind of doubled down on that and said, like, this was probably the most complete roster from start to finish this season. So, Ryan, I'm going to go to you first on this one. Is this the start of a dynastic run for Boston? Because dynasties are measured by titles. Like I said, we've seen them go to the Eastern Conference Finals, we've seen them go to the finals. But are they on the brink of kind of a dynastic run with this roster?
Dynastic run. I guess it depends on your definition of dynastic, which I have a different definition than other people do. I think a lot of people are like, it's got to be 3 championships, or it's got to be 2 and like 5 finals appearances. People have these like weird, like arbitrary, I guess, things that they come up with. I think the East is pretty weak, so they have a good chance of being a consistent threat, which I would argue is dynastic. Are they going to be the Warriors? Probably not. Like that was, once in a generation thing. But yeah, I mean, I don't see why they couldn't be the best team in the East for the next 2 or 3 years. And that's like a big deal, right? That would be like 6+ years of being like a finals competitor. And then another 2, 3 before that of being a conference finals competitor. Like that's almost a decade of consistent performance. Maybe I say this because my Rockets were the best regular season team for so long, and they didn't win a championship. So maybe my definition of dynasty has been shaded by their lack of championship. But I think we have to consider like making it to the finals multiple times would be a success, right? They've already been twice with this core, so this if they go 3 more times and win 1 more, then that's probably a dynasty.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, and I know the definition of dynasty can be a little tricky. I know like the 3 and 5 or the 4 and 10 or 4 total. And some people like even you look at the Buffalo Bills and they went to the Super Bowl 4 years in a row, something that's never been done like that. That's something you could probably call a dynastic run, right? But yeah, I think we're already kind of on the brink. I think I agree with you, Ryan, that they've been there, they've been competitive. I'd like to see at least 1 more title, not to put a static number on it necessarily, but I feel like you have to win at least 2 to really be considered as what we would call a dynasty. 3 really, I've always 3 always felt like the magic number for teams and for coaches, right? Like the Chiefs getting 3, it's, are we going to talk about, the potential for them being considered the new Patriots dynasty? Andy Reid is now among like the greatest coaches of all time because he's got 3 titles. And I always felt like 3 kind of felt like a magic number, but there's no static number to put on it. But I certainly would like to, if we're going to talk about this Celtics team as being on a dynastic run, I think 2 at a minimum and certainly a few more finals appearances. Absolutely. Bentley, do you agree, disagree? Do you have a number? Do you have a kind of set of criteria usually considered for a dynasty? And if so, do you think this Boston team is kind of primed for their own version of a dynastic run?
Sure. So my just kind of baseline for a dynasty is like 3 and 5 years. That's usually how I judge that, right? I do kind of like how Ryan put it, though, that being competitive and having a chance every year makes you somewhat dynastic. I would calling it like a mini dynasty, maybe like an Eastern Conference dynasty. Like when LeBron went to 8 straight finals out of the East, like that's like an Eastern Conference dynasty, right? It's such an arbitrary term, dynasty, right? It really means different things to different people. But I think I just would play the odds and say no, right? Things in the NBA change so goddamn fast.
They do.
Like, players move, players get hurt, like coaching staffs change. There are things in the NBA that are just beyond the control of those that are actually on the court that move so rapidly that you would almost be foolish, right, to predict a dynasty. We said the same thing last year. Is Denver poised to go back to back? And I for one said, yeah, like if you're asking me, are they correctly favored to go back to back? Yeah, for sure. I'm going to say the same thing about Boston and say, yes, they should have the best odds to repeat, but that's because they play in the East. They're bringing back basically the same roster. They're bringing the same head coach back. But like all of those things can change. You know what I mean? In the West this year, we saw the rise of Anthony Edwards. We saw the rise of the Oklahoma City Thunder, who were the 1 seed. We saw basically the rise of Victor Wembanyama. I have to imagine San Antonio is going to be much better next year than they were this past year, right? Things change so rapidly. We haven't even gone into the free agency period. Who knows where if Paul George ends up in Orlando or Paul George ends up in Philadelphia, right? Or if somebody decides to go and join the Knicks, who knows if they're not better next year, right? There's so many like moving parts that I think I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that Boston is ready to make a dynastic type run. Am I probably going to pick them to be in the Eastern Conference Finals next year? Yeah, absolutely. It just makes the most sense. But I'm with you, Gary. I would need to see one more championship before I can say that they were really on like a dynastic run. Now, I will caveat that by saying they lost in 2022 to one of the, I don't know, 13 best basketball players ever in Steph Curry, right? Wherever you want to put him on your list, he's one of the greatest basketball players ever, greatest shooter of all time. And that was like a legacy finals for him. He finally got the MVP. He won kind of his closeout championship because I don't think they're going to win another one. And so like you can, but you should not knock the Boston Celtics for losing that championship, right? You lost to an all-time great. So if they go on and they lose, let's say Milwaukee comes out of the East next year or Boston or Orlando, maybe, imagine, and they lose the Eastern Conference Finals, and then the 26th season, they go on and win a championship that year. That would be 3 finals runs in 5 years and 2 championships in 5 years. Like, that's an incredible run, right? That's sort of dynastic. However, in my opinion, if you're going to be a dynasty, I would like to see 3 from you.
Yeah, that's fair.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
I forgot to say this, and I like to have the last word, as Bentley knows. They have 2 things that one going for them and one going against them when we talk about dynasties. So dynasty really is, to me, is can you tell the story of basketball without talking about this team? Sometimes that's like a negative thing, and maybe that, but I mean in a positive way, right? So they have one positive. They're the Boston Celtics. That's a pretty storied. Yeah, they're like a pretty popular franchise in their hometown and in the history of the NBA. The negative is I don't think anyone cares about any of the players on the team. I think that's like the weird part about it, right? Like,
yeah.
Jason Tatum is currently a top 10 guy in the league, and like people just don't care.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe I don't think it's because of Boston. They don't have like the personalities.
I think it's the personality thing, man. I think it is him. And has anybody ever heard Jaylen Brown talk? I know he got interviewed after games, but like hyperbolically, like neither of those guys are kind of an in-your-face personality. Jason Tatum, like the most iconic images with him is like him with his kid, right? After games, like that's not the personality that we usually get from superstars. And sorry, Ryan, I know I interrupted you, but you nailed it on the head. I think it's the personality thing.
Yeah, I think Jaylen Brown is like a cerebral guy, right? He's not like he's so interesting to talk about.
From Cal Berkeley.
Yeah, he gives like TED Talks about robotics and stuff. Like he's pretty chill. But yeah,
he has no aura, dude. He has no aura.
I mean, that's a big part, right? Like, name every dynasty, and there's like a player or 2 that you attach to every single one of them.
Absolutely.
They could win 3 championships in a row, and I'm not sure everyone would go, the Tatum Brown dynasty. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't feel they would go, the Celtics dynasty of the early or the mid 2020s, right?
Right.
They would not go the Shaq and Kobe dynasty. Like that's. Even though Shaq and Kobe also played for a big franchise, they also were extremely popular for a variety of reasons. So I just wanted to highlight that as a lot of that is how the public feels about it.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's right on the head. One thing I want to point out too, Bentley, just to kind of circle back to, in terms of sustainability, right, of this Boston run, you mentioned the puck luck they got with injuries. And it wasn't just that they stayed healthy. You're looking at Giannis getting injured. You're looking at the Knicks getting decimated by injury in the series against the Pacers. Now, that's not all to say that I think the Bucks or the Knicks would have beaten Boston at full strength, but I think it's part of the story in that they didn't face those 2. They didn't face Giannis. They didn't face the loaded Knicks roster with probably the most surprising upstart superstar of the year, right? Everybody's favorite short king now. So they did have a little bit of puck luck when it came to being healthy themselves, but they also did have some puck luck in terms of their playoffs run. They didn't face Denver. They didn't face Minnesota. They didn't face the 1 seed in the West. So there's a number of things that, you mentioned the injury luck. It doesn't just go in one direction for them staying healthy. They did have some the other way too. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what, if they are going to make this run, right? What story are we going to be able to tell about the next year and the next year and the next year? So just one little point I wanted to make there. So Bentley, I'm going to give you your moment, bud. Who do we want to thank for this Boston team and this title run?
Oh my goodness. I've
got one team in my byline here.
Yeah, well, I have about 15 individuals that I could probably thank. Well, let's start with Mr. and Mrs. Pierce, who gave birth to Paul, who went to the University of Kansas and then was drafted by the Boston Celtics, and then turns out couldn't win the big one, so it forced them to go out and make a trade for Ray Allen and make a trade for Kevin Garnett. And then they won the big one, and then they realized that Doc Rivers is not that good of a coach. So then they traded those guys to the newly minted Brooklyn Nets with their billionaire owner who bought the team, established it in Brooklyn, and then immediately traded for these three guys and then sold the team.
And then left.
Who traded all of their draft picks to Boston, who ended up using them on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, which brings me to my next person to thank, Mr. and Mrs. Krzyzewski, for having their son named Mike, who became the greatest college basketball coach of all time and recruited this lowly 5-star recruit that nobody had ever heard of, Jason Tatum, brought him in for one season, took him up to New York. They played in the Barclays Center in, I believe it was 2016. He completely took over the ACC tournament, single-handedly won them an ACC tournament. Not a big deal, something casual. As a true freshman, whatever. People don't talk about it, but I'm talking about it right now. Let's see. I'd also like to thank the Charlotte Hornets for taking that awful Kemba Walker contract off the books for Boston Celtics. I'd like to thank the Cleveland Cavaliers for taking the awful Isaiah Thomas contract off the table for the Boston Celtics. I'd like to thank the Milwaukee Bucks for just seemingly being willing to give up Jrue Holiday for goddamn pennies on the dollar, because Dame Lillard is 35, 36 years old or whatever, and going to be making $65 million in 2 years. I would also like to thank who else do I have to thank here? Where's my list? I had
part of that Jrue Holiday trade, the Miami Heat, for being so high on Tyler Hero.
Exactly, the Miami Heat. Yes, absolutely. Oh, I'd like to thank Gary's and my favorite team, the Washington Wizards, for being willing to part ways with the best player we've had on our roster since John Wall left, and Kristaps Porzingis, for literally nothing. I believe he was part of that the whole Chris Paul, Jordan Poole, like that whole deal. I'd like to thank the Memphis Grizzlies for buying into the Defensive Player of the Year hype in Marcus Smart and thinking, oh, maybe we can pair him with Ja, because Marcus Smart, totally a level-headed guy, is going to be able to usher him into his new reformed era. I'd like to thank Oklahoma City for taking Al Horford's contract off the books for Philadelphia and then letting him just fucking sit for an entire year while they still made the playoffs. And then they were like, you know what? We don't really want you here for the rebuild. Why don't you go back to Boston and just join the best team in the East? Yeah, whatever. I think that might be the end of my list. But I think most importantly, the biggest takeaway from what I have to say about this series is that this is a win for college basketball. Okay? You have ACC legend Jason Tatum on the floor. You have ACC legend Jaylen Brown, who went to Cal Berkeley,
who's now part of the ACC.
Yeah, noted historic ACC franchise Cal Berkeley, just won freaking finals MVP. You have
real estate overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, right?
Exactly. Well, all the water touches, so technically, it should just be the Coastal Conference.
Yeah.
And then I'd like to point out that Brad Stevens is a college basketball guy. 2010 Butler, ever heard of him? Gordon Hayward. Fucking thank you to Charlotte, who also took the awful Gordon Hayward money off the books for the Boston Celtics. There are just so many people to thank for gifting this absolute asterisk of a championship to the Boston Celtics this year. And not even going into all the injuries that you perfectly laid out, Gary. Just so many guys did not play. And this, just a real win for the ACC specifically, but college basketball as a whole. It's wonderful to see college superstars on the biggest stage in the NBA taking over the world.
It's beautiful. And you didn't even mention the Sixers and the Lakers. The Sixers, who traded up to take Markelle Fultz in the draft, that the Celtics then took Jason Tatum.
Yep.
The Sixers and the Lakers, who took
Lonzo Ball.
Yeah, and Brandon Ingram ahead of Jaylen Brown.
Yep.
So
good pick, by the way. I stand by that one.
The Lakers legitimately lost on the draft odds in consecutive years and still had a chance to take the best player in both drafts and let them both slide to the Boston Celtics. So hell of a run.
I stand by the Brandon Ingram pick, by the way, just for the record.
That's fine. Lonzo Ball and that was a mess. And Fultz and it's tough. Ryan, any counterpoints to Bentley's tirade about the NBA's ineffective general management?
No, I think most of the decisions at the time made sense to me from the other teams. What you said, Gary, I think Philadelphia thought Fultz was the best player. A lot of other people thought Fultz was the best player. Boston, won that one. But I think if we went back and judged that, a lot of people would have viewed that very differently at the time. Fultz was an incredible college player. So was Tatum, but Fultz forgot how to shoot right when he came into the league. Also, the Drew Holiday trade, completely fair trade. Williams, Brogdon, and 2 firsts for Drew Holiday at this point in his career is a fair trade. It's not like Boston's just like stealing players. These are legitimate trades, in my opinion. Also, if you're a rebuilding team, you don't just hold on to players because you don't want Boston to win a championship. That would be a weird thing to do. Portland's like, you can't have them. You'd be too good. That doesn't make sense from them. I don't. I think generally Boston just did a good job. So I would give Boston the credit for building their team and taking advantage of the situations other teams and players found themselves in.
So Boston, in one person's eyes, Boston fleeced everybody. In the other person's eyes, Boston took advantage of situations that presented themselves. I like it. Differing opinions. I like it. All right. Let's
wait. Hold on. You mentioned Ryan brought up Philly with the Fultz thing. Explain to me in what world it was a good idea to trade Al Horford, who signed a max deal to Oklahoma City.
I was talking about the draft trade.
Yeah, I'm talking about fucking Al Horford getting a $35 million vacation in Oklahoma City.
Well, I mean, I don't really care about the Philly side of it. I think Oklahoma City did what they had to do in that situation, and Boston took advantage. This has happened basically since free agency has existed. This is how it has worked. I don't think this is a new phenomenon. Are we going to be mad at Shane Battier for going to the Heat? I don't really understand what we're doing here by getting mad at players wanting to play for a good team.
But Al Horford wanted to play in Philly. That's why he signed their max offer.
I mean, yeah, he didn't make any sense there, though. So Philly felt like they couldn't play him and Embiid together. I don't think anything here is terrible. I think we're hot taking it a little bit here.
Revisionist history.
Yeah, I mean, 2020 vision is backwards, right? I can go back and be like, wow, Fultz really wasn't very good. It's he was. A lot of people thought he was the best player in the draft. Pretty much everybody said Al Horford's got to get out of Philadelphia. That doesn't make sense with Embiid. It didn't work out. Get him out. Oklahoma City took him and was like, you're not going to play, but we're going to trade you for assets later. This is all completely reasonable things to do. And other teams benefited from these trades. The Trailblazers are in a better situation because of the Drew Holiday trade. These are not insane things. I think Boston just got a little lucky. That helps.
If you see the 617 area code pop up on the phone and you're an NBA GM, do not answer. Don't do it.
It's like NFL GMs used to have to hang up on Belichick, right?
Same with Oklahoma City. I don't know what the area code is, but if you see the Oklahoma City area
Oh,
code
man.
pop up, don't answer.
Don't take Presti's calls.
Yeah, it's like the Moneyball thing where
Yeah.
they're like, oh, he called and he asked about this prospect.
There's
Let's
gotta
look
be
at that guy
something.
again. What is he doing? what does he see that we don't?
Yeah. What are we
Oh.
overlooking here?
We also need to thank the San Antonio Spurs for gifting Derek White to the Boston Celtics. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I don't remember any of these teams just giving these players away. I think
They did.
for them.
They did.
It's
It's in
like,
the fine print.
Pocket
You know
lit
what?
and a stick of Winter Fresh.
Derek White really does love the East Coast. You can have him. We're really a player empowerment team. You can have him.
Yeah, a kid from Colorado loves the East Coast.
All right, onward and upward. So we've had some breaking news. JJ Redick is the new coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. JJ Redick, Mr. Podcast with LeBron James. JJ Redick, Mr. TV, has done a very good job, in my opinion anyway, done a very good job on broadcasts for the NBA. He is now the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. His first coaching gig in basketball will be as the head man in charge of one of the most prominent franchises, one of the two most prominent franchises in the NBA. He takes over a team that struggled the last couple of years to really try to get into the playoffs, playing games, etc. The Lakers did make a bit of a run in 2023, but not so much this year in 2024. They have LeBron James, presumably, although he's not technically locked up for this coming season. They have Anthony Davis. And beyond that, it's a bit of a mishmash of a roster, and you can probably talk yourself into a few of these players being, pieces on maybe a winning team, but it is a roster that needs help. It's also a roster that has the looming shadow of LeBron James over it. Whether you believe Brian Windhorst or not, there's some sort of shadow cast by the fact that LeBron James is on the roster. Windy claims that LeBron never makes decisions about roster and team moves, whereas people with a brain understand that LeBron James is who he is, and you would obviously consult with that guy, if not take his phone call when he has an idea about the roster. So I frame all that because I'm really curious to hear your guys' thoughts on not just JJ Redick as a head coach, but JJ Redick inheriting the situation that he's inheriting in LA, because there is the personalities there, right? AD is kind of a superstar-esque player, maybe never on the court, but LeBron James is obviously, the most prominent basketball player on the face of the planet for the last 15 years, 16 years, right? So, Ryan, going to go your way first. I really want to kind of get your all-encompassing thoughts on JJ Redick heading to the Lakers. How do you think he's going to do? Do you like the hire? And what do you think some of the biggest challenges he's going to face in his first stint as a head coach, especially taking over this franchise?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good gig to your first foray into coaching to get a Lakers job. It's pretty good. Similar to many of my situations in life where I've been hired for jobs I was not qualified for, to include the one I currently hold. So, good for him taking advantage of that situation where clearly he was not the first choice, but was eventually the choice, and that's all that really matters. I think he's a really smart guy. I think X's and O's he'll be okay. I think player-to-player situations he'll probably be okay. I think the hard part is what kind of coach are you? Are you what's your structure look like, right? Coaches are kind of judged by the players on their attention to detail. What does their routine look like? How do they respond to things? And we have no idea what that looks like for him, right? We know, like I said, the X's and O's side of it and his smarts there and his career and probably how he handles players because of his podcast. He's done pretty well with that. Clearly a personable guy. But who does he surround himself with? What does the routine look like? Those types of things. I think that's the big question mark and very easy to get wrong. Lots of people get it wrong. I've learned in my career, it's who you surround yourself with that often makes you successful and not your own abilities. And I think maybe the best ability is to surround yourself with people that have abilities. And I hope that he's able to identify that, get himself a veteran coach, probably a guy who was a head coach at one point on the staff, to show him, this is how we did it.
Detroit
this is how
just
the
let one
structure
go.
works. Yeah, but he's taking a year off from coaching because his
just a year.
Yeah,
I think his wife is sick, I believe. So I think
Yes.
he is. I think he is taking a year off. So, and he's making a lot of money, so he probably wouldn't cost
Got a
much
lot-
in the
got
future.
a lot of money to just collect.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys, right, who have at least done some of it. That even as an advisor. So that's what I think is going to be hard for him, and I expect some growing pains. How do you handle timeouts, like that type of stuff? As someone who has coached a men's league, that's the hardest part. Really, it's just what do you say in the huddles? What's this practice look like? How do you do these things? Everything else in the game kind of gets figured out. I think it's just how do you handle the minutia. I think that's the main job of a head coach.
Yeah, for sure. Bentley, what are your thoughts?
Well, as you may have seen once or twice above my head, kind of a JJ guy. So I find myself in a very tough.
Wait, he wore number 4 at Duke?
Yeah, actually, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Not Quinn Cook. It was JJ Redick. Yeah. So I find myself in a real a sticky wicket here, you might call it, if you're from the UK. I'm not a I'm not a Boston guy. I'm also not a Lakers guy, or like a LeBron guy, really. Like, I respect the shit out of LeBron for what he's done on the court and all the money he's made off the court, obviously. Don't get me wrong. I've never been like a LeBron fan. I have nothing against him. He just has never really played for teams that I cared for that much. But I really want to root for JJ Redick. I want him to succeed as a coach. I think it would be awesome to see him become one of the premier coaches in the NBA, right? And he's gone to a place where they have had some big-time coaches that were extremely successful, right? Now, you mentioned the kind of overhanging shadow of LeBron's impending end of career trajectory. That's real. Like, JJ Redick played an entire NBA career and then became part of the A team on ESPN broadcasting booths, all in the same amount of time that LeBron was in the NBA playing. So we know that the end is approaching for LeBron. We don't know when, and we don't know how it will look. And due to recent events in LeBron's career, like, we don't know that any coaching job is secure with him on the roster, right? So that gives me a little bit of pause. But I think Ryan said all the correct things, right? It's less about game day management as it is about how you run a practice, how you deal with the players, how you interact with the front office, what your philosophy is for team building, right? Or roster building, I guess, rather. And JJ is going to have to figure out all of those things on the fly, because I know that he has done a little bit of coaching here and there on like much, much lower levels than the NBA, right? But it's a whole different ballgame. Now, I don't think that he'll have any problem relating to the players or dealing with the superstars or even like kind of the role players, because that's what he was for most of his career in the NBA, was a role player, right? So he's going to understand how those guys operate, what they need to succeed, the kind of pep talks, whatever, right? But he has to develop his own coaching style and what it looks like on the day-to-day basis and all of those things that I just talked about. So that's going to be an interesting kind of development for him to go through. And it'll be fun to watch from the outside to see how that translates to on-the-court success, because the Lakers, if you follow their losses in the playoffs, right, like if you follow along, they obviously lost in the first round. Every team that the team that they lost to going forward, all of them lost in the next round, right? Denver lost in the next round to Minnesota. Minnesota lost to Dallas. Dallas lost to Boston, right? So they're so far removed from what we just saw in the Boston Celtics over there in LA, that I don't think it's a realistic thought to say that JJ Redick is going to come in and turn everything around and make them championship contenders. I just don't think that's the case, right? He's going to year 22 with LeBron. He's going into post 30-year-old now Anthony Davis, and that's just not a recipe for success, in my opinion. Austin Reeves is on the roster. Jalen Hood-Schifino is there. I don't know who else is going to play for them next year, right? Like, so as excited as I am to see JJ Redick become an NBA head coach and what he can do with a full roster and maybe a full offseason of training camp and implementing his own system, I don't imagine it's going to go very well for him, because we just spent how many minutes earlier in the show talking about how tough the West is, and they beat up on each other all year long. And that was the case last year, and the fucking Lakers won in the play-in tournament. Like, I'm very wary to say that JJ is going to be a successful head coach in LA, but boy, do I hope it's the case for his head coaching career.
Yeah, and that's my worry, right? I became a JJ guy. I hated him in college. I hated him, but I'm an admitted Duke hater, right? And I correct you every time you misspell it, that sort of thing. So I am admittedly like a Duke hater when it comes to college basketball. I became a JJ guy because of who he was as a player in the NBA. I became a JJ guy because I watched him evolve into a very important piece on some very good teams. I watched him evolve into a guy that I could really appreciate on the court. I love 3-and-D guys because that's kind of who I was as a pickup basketball player. I never played a lot of organized, but as a pickup basketball player, I was very much like a 3-and-D guy, little bit of facilitation, but mostly 3-and-D. And I appreciate those guys. Bruce Bowen was one of my favorite players when he played and on down the line, right? I appreciate those guys. So I became a JJ guy, and then when he moved into the media, I really appreciated how good he was on game day broadcasts, because that's not an easy thing to do. For anybody out there listening that's a NASCAR fan, I'm going to tell you Kevin Harvick is the case in point of why I say that's not a very easy transition from playing to in the booth. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to understand where to contribute, how to be a color commentary guy. If you watched Brady do the UFL championship, all 7 of you that watched that, he wasn't very good. So it's not an easy thing to do. So I appreciated that about JJ as well. He worked at his craft. He became really, really good. He and Doris Burke had a lot of chemistry on their broadcast. So I respect that about him as well. And then his podcast. He doesn't hold back either. I love how just transparent he is. I love how willing he is to kind of put his reputation on the line for the things he believes, the things that he knows as a former player. And he's not afraid to correct people. He did it in the studio on ESPN. He did it on broadcast. He would correct people when they said things like, this player, yada, yada. And he's like, wait a minute, let's talk. Stephen A. Smith, he put him in his place quite a bit. So I really have developed into, I'm a JJ guy, right? I'm not a JJ at Duke guy. I will never be a JJ at Duke guy, but I am a JJ Redick guy. So when he was linked to this Lakers job, I was very vocal with both of you and Andy, who does the Blitz, and I talked to him a lot about basketball as well. I don't like this situation for JJ because of some of the points that you brought up, Bentley. And I know, Ryan, you're absolutely right. It's going to be more about how he prepares, how he puts himself in position to succeed, who he surrounds himself with. The unfortunate part is he's inheriting a roster. He's inheriting an impatient roster for an impatient ownership group for an impatient franchise. And this roster is not built to win games next season. They're just not. It's not going to happen. They're not going to make a run in the playoffs. And we just watched Darvin Ham get shit canned. We just watched Vogel get shit canned after winning. And it's one of those things that I feel, unfortunately for JJ, is he's not going to get the opportunity that we watched Joe Mazzulla get, where he was maybe not a great coach in year one with a great roster who kind of carried him to an NBA Finals. And then we watched kind of like Malone kind of coach circles around him a bit in the NBA Finals. I don't think JJ is going to get that opportunity to learn how to fail in order to succeed. And that's the part that I hate about this hire. I would have loved to see him go to, Portland, right? Like a team that's clearly in rebuild, a team that's clearly willing to be patient going forward. I hate this situation for him, but man, if he succeeds beyond the tribulations that he's going to face with the Lakers, JJ's primed for a lot of success as a coach in the NBA. And I think JJ has the potential to be a very good coach in the NBA. So maybe he's going to succeed in spite of what's around him in LA. But I worry about the situation because we know LeBron is very, very quick to throw coaches and his teammates under the bus in the media. He's very, very quick to get real short and visually irritated and disturbed with his coaches and his teammates. So I do worry about that a bit. I hate the situation for him, but I'll be rooting for him. Hopefully he's successful in LA. All right. Last topic for the night. We had our first trade news break tonight. Alex Caruso, who all of us talked quite a bit around the trade deadline of like, was there a spot for him to go? Was there a team that could really use him? He's finally on the move after the season, and he's headed to Oklahoma City, the number 1 seed in the West this past season. They are trading Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. I'm really curious about fit with this one. I really want to get your guys' feel for this because we've talked a lot about Alex Caruso and how good he is defensively. He can contribute a bit on the offensive end, but I think he's a real difference maker defensively. Bentley, going to you first. What do you think about this Caruso move to the Thunder? Is this something that might kind of push them more toward like a Western Conference Finals and maybe into the NBA Finals?
Yeah. Presuming that it is just like a 1-for-1 swap, and this is the roster that Oklahoma City takes into the playoffs next year, where you're literally just subbing out Josh Giddey for Caruso, I still don't think it changes them a whole lot. It increases their backcourt defense, but I mean, we talked on the show last year, and even in the playoffs, what they really needed to do around the trade deadline was trade for a big body, right? That seems to be where they're lacking the most, is behind Chet Holmgren. I like the deal.
Barely qualifies as a big body.
Oh, yeah, true. He's a tall body.
He's a tall body.
Yeah. I like both the players involved in this deal. I think that Giddey is better than what he showed in Oklahoma City, given the prominence of SGA running the offense, right? I think that Giddey will probably be better where I don't even know if he's going to have the ball a whole lot more in Chicago because, you know, Kobe White played so well at the end of the year that he's going to get a lot of run with the ball in his hands. But I think that Giddey can be better in an offense where he's given a little more freedom and playmaking ability rather than being a connective piece like he was in Oklahoma City. And Caruso is just a really good basketball player. You know, he does all of the little things and he plays super hard every night. And he's a guy that every team would want to have on their roster, right? So I think it probably raises the floor a little bit because of how poor in Oklahoma City, that is, because of how poorly Josh Giddey played in the playoffs. He's not an exterior shooting threat, a perimeter shooting threat. Giddey is not, whereas Caruso can knock down some shots for you, and he plays dog defense. You know, so good luck to any backcourts that have to go up against Caruso and Lu Dort. Y'all have fun with that. I would not want to play against that team, but I still think that they need a big body. They need someone to back up Chet, someone who can bang with Jokic and literally anybody else. Nurkic, whoever you want to name, Anthony Davis.
Towers in Minnesota.
The Towers in Minnesota, right? You just got to have somebody that can guard, at least deter those guys from going to the rim in like a physical manner, right? So I think the trade is probably better for Oklahoma City than it is for Chicago. We know what Chicago is, and that's not a good basketball team at the moment. But I still have my Giddey stock. I'm holding on to that.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on this trade?
I think it's pretty fair for both teams. I know a lot of people are shocked that all they got was Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. I've seen a lot of that commentary. I think Caruso is probably not as valuable as people think he is. He's good, but I don't think he's in the tier that a lot of people think he is. I heard a lot like 3 unprotected first for him. Like people were talking about that. I think that's crazy, especially in the way the league is designed now with the cap. So I think it's pretty fair. I think it's clearly Chicago wants someone to run the show, and they can let Josh Giddey play his natural position, which Oklahoma City can't. So I think that's beneficial to them. Also shows that Lonzo Ball is almost assuredly not coming back after that injury. I think a lot of people thought it was career ending when it happened. So they clearly don't feel comfortable with him ever coming back in a reasonable way, I think. And then Caruso with Oklahoma City, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think, similar to what Bentley said, having a big is probably their number one priority, but I expect them to address that either this, off season or sometime in the season. I'd be shocked if they didn't to some extent. They have so many assets, it should be pretty easy to do it. So I don't really hold that against them with this trade. I think that's a reasonable expectation for them to do something about that. So yeah, I mean, Dort, SGA, Caruso, that guard rotation is going to be really good, and I think it's beneficial even if he's only a guy that comes off the bench. I think they just need one more guy and a big, and I think they're in a really good spot.
For sure. All right. Well, that kind of brings us to our close here. I want to send a quick shout out to Bob Cousy, who at the age of 95 was able to see Boston win number 18 and pass the Lakers. Legendary Hall of Famer, all-timer, top 50 player in the history of the game, Bob Cousy. And he was able to see Boston get number 18. I know he was kind of public talking about just wanting to see one more. At 95 years old, you start to talk about kind of terminality as a reality. So congrats to Boston, and a little bit of a tip of the cap to one of the all-timers and being able to watch Boston get number 18. I want to pass it around the room. Bentley, you got any closing thoughts for us tonight?
I have one thought, and it's that I think it's unfair that people are taking 6 titles away from the Lakers and saying that they only have 12 because they played in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of bullshit because the organization did not change, right? If you still call yourself the same thing, right? I think that counts. Now, people will say Seattle Supersonics and Oklahoma City. To me, that's a totally different franchise, similar to the Colts and the Browns, right? Whenever they left Baltimore to go to Cleveland, I think that the Lakers deserve to keep those 6 championships. That may be kind of a hot take, especially from folks in Boston, but to me, it's the same franchise. You still go by the same name, you just relocated cities, right? The people in the other city are not going to celebrate the 12 championships you won in Los Angeles. That's totally fine. But you can say our city won 6 championships, right? So, that's cool. I think that they should be able to count them. Obviously, the record book counts it. But, for any people that are giving grief to the Lakers fans, you will very, very rarely hear me stick up for the Lakers organization. But I think this is one that they deserve to have the 6 championships because it's still the Lakers.
Yeah, it's silly. Are we going to take away, I don't know, the Boston Red Sox titles or – I don't know. There's so many teams that moved and had teams in their city. The Dodgers, the Giants, right? The San Francisco Giants. It's so silly to have that conversation. It's probably a bunch of, I don't know, pissed off Boston fans who want to try to take those titles. It's so dumb. So dumb. But here's an interesting tidbit. Ryan, I'm going to kind of throw this your way. So the Lakers have 17 NBA championships. How many professional basketball championships do they have?
How many did the Lakers have?
Yes.
So you're talking about their BAA championships.
The NBL, actually. I think their BAA
Oh, their NBL
The
championships.
BAA was wrapped into the NBA, correct? I believe.
Their statistics are included. The NBL are not for some reason. I don't know why the NBA did that. They made that decision in the 40s. They have. Let me think off the top of my head here. What do they got? Another 3 in the NBL? Is it more than that? No. Okay. I know they have some in the BAA.
They did have, I think, 2 in the BAA. I think.
Yeah, they were a really good team in like the mid 40s into
George Mikan and.
Yep. Yeah, they were really good at that point before they moved to LA.
Yeah, so I'm not going to take credit for stumping Ryan because I Wikipedia'd this, but they won 1 in the NBL, so they would technically still be tied with the Boston Celtics if the NBA recognized that NBL title in 1948.
Oh yeah, they only played 1 year in the NBL. I don't know why. I knew that. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 1 year they played, they won the championship.
Yeah.
And Mikan was the MVP that year.
Yep.
And they beat the Blackhawks, who are now Atlanta.
Yep. The super deep 5-team NBL. But they did have they had the Blackhawks, they had the let's see.
How do you forget the Oshkosh All-Stars?
Oshkosh All-Stars, yep.
The Indianapolis Koutskis? Come on, man. The Sheboygan Redskins? I mean, do you not pay attention to the league?
Yeah. All right, Ryan, your way. Any closing thoughts as we get out of here tonight?
I just want to. I'll include my opinion on taking away their Minneapolis championships. Yeah. That's just a crazy thing to say. It doesn't make any sense. If anything, those count more than the Los Angeles ones because the Lakers that's the only place that team name makes sense.
Right, there ain't no damn Lakers in LA.
If anything, we should take their LA ones away because the name doesn't make any sense in LA.
Yeah.
If we did that, Boston, that only they would benefit because literally every other team has moved at some point, especially in the 40s and 50s. They either went defunct or they moved. So I think that's kind of crazy. I do want to say one non-basketball thing, and I want to say really sad to see Willie Mays pass away.
Yeah.
My personal greatest fielder of all time, fielding player. I was asked today by someone at work, and they said, if you had to remove either Bob Cousy or Willie Mays from the history of sports, so they just don't play sports. And I said, like, you have to remove one. And I said, I'd remove Bob Cousy. And that's hard for me to say, right? As you all know. Yeah. But Willie Mays is so important to the history of sport in America, so important to the history of race relations in America. I think that might be his biggest impact. I think the greatest hitter of all time, and just important to everything that we know about sport in the modern era. And I think Reggie Jackson, my last thing, if you go listen to his comments, he gave a little 2-minute spiel talking not just about Willie Mays, but some stuff that's been going on in the world today. And I think that is valuable for everyone to listen to. So that's all I want to say.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you shouted that out. I'm going to kind of close on one thing. Dan Patrick put it perfectly. I tried to convey to some folks that I talked baseball with a bit, and just like Willie Mays is like one of the all-time legends of the game, right? He was a 5-tool guy, like the ultimate 5-tool guy. He was an incredible fielder, had a brilliant arm, fast, and he hit for average and he hit for power, 600 home runs, career 300 hitter. But everybody under the age of 12 tried to make the over-the-shoulder basket catch, right? You were always trying to be Willie Mays in baseball, so much so to the point that Major League, the movie franchise, named one of their characters literally after Willie Mays because that's how important he was to the game. Dan Patrick said, like, Willie Mays is not a legend. Willie Mays is an icon because everything you inspire to do on the baseball field, he was that. He was great at it. And Ryan, you mentioned a lot of the off the field stuff, but on the field, Willie Mays was baseball. All 5 tools and just a lot of flair for the game, the say hey kid, and just tremendous and roving the center field alleys within the Polo Grounds tells you just how fast he was for sure. But just an unbelievable baseball player, and probably the most complete baseball player that's ever played the game. For Bentley, for Ryan, and the rest of the Backyard family, this has been Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. We will be back with some draft talk. We don't have a schedule necessarily set yet, but the NBA draft is next week on Wednesday. And as we approach the offseason, we'll be sure to make sure we post in terms of when to expect content. We'll try to keep active throughout the offseason, especially as we heat up with the trades, obviously, around the draft results. And free agency is going to start to heat up. Trades should really start to heat up. We had, one obviously break today that we talked about, but I expect potentially a pretty busy offseason with some teams trying to play catch up with the Bostons and the Denvers and the Minnesotas of the world, and maybe some teams that are looking to break down, rebuild, and probably tank for a much better draft class next year as well. So we'll keep you posted, but we'll see you at some point next week when we have a schedule set. We'll post and we'll talk draft. The NBA draft is less than a week away. For everybody here at Backyard Buckets, we are